Well, good afternoon again. This is Bryan Daniels. I'm President and CEO of the Blount Partnership. I want to welcome you all to another series on our conversations with the community leaders. Today, I'm joined by Patrick Wilson. He is the President of the Knoxville Metropolitan Airport Authority, and appreciate the time he's given us today to have a conversation. So, Patrick, welcome.
Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate being a part of the program.
We, with this series, we've been really talking about how COVID has impacted a variety of different businesses and initiatives in our community. And I can't really think of any other industry right now that is feeling the hardest effects, and that is in the airline industry, which needless to say is probably at the tip of the spear when it comes to the devastating effects of this post-COVID or COVID economy.
Well, without a doubt, there is no event that has impacted the airline industry and the airport industry more than this COVID pandemic. There's been some pretty historic events over the last 20 years that have had their impacts. Go back to the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and 2003. The SARS outbreak had an impact, and certainly even the recession after 2008 had an impact, but nothing has impacted as much as this COVID pandemic around the world and throughout the country.
If you could tell us and remind me of how many nonstop flights a day commercial airlines does the airport authority see before COVID?
Before COVID, right. So we have 5 commercial airlines, and prior to COVID, we had just hit a record of 29 direct destinations.
Wow.
And that's with those 5 airlines and those 29 destinations, we had around 120 scheduled flights, arrivals and departures on a daily basis.
Wow. And the airport had become a hub for one of the airlines, correct?
Allegiant Airlines had created an aircraft base here.
Okay.
So that means that they had stationed 3 aircraft here and then have a staff of over 100 people. And what that specifically means is those aircraft depart here in the morning and last flight of the night return here. So this is home for those aircraft. And the real benefit to that for the region is it gave those aircraft a chance to make a lot of flights and really be utilized well to serve a lot of markets. So I think Allegiant had grown to over, I think, 12 direct connections, direct destinations they serve out of McGee-Tyson prior to the COVID outbreak.
So prior to COVID also, what impact do military operations there at the 134th, and I know you've got the small Army unit there, and then Cirrus Aircraft and your FBO, what have you seen before COVID? What was operations or the impact of the airport with those entities?
Yeah, really all functions of the airport had continued to grow over a number of years. Most people coming to the terminal building are familiar with the airline side of the business. So you come through the terminal building, get on your airline, but a lot of people don't realize all the other aviation activity we have around the airport. We have an air cargo center that has multiple flights a day on very large aircraft from FedEx and UPS. We have the Air National Guard, who is a significant part of the airport and partner with the airport and a significant employer in the region. We have aerospace industry like Cirrus Aircraft and ExpressJet. Cirrus is an aircraft producer of general aviation aircraft. They delivered more general aviation aircraft than any other company, and all those came out of McGee-Tyson over the last few years. And then companies like ExpressJet do large commercial aircraft maintenance. So when you look airport wide, we have about 3,500 employees that call the airport their home. And all of those activities, from the aerospace industry to cargo to general aviation, had been on several years of growth before the first week of March.
So as we talked, as you mentioned there, before COVID, kind of the operations, let's talk a little bit about what changes occurred to the airport as we saw COVID come from China, really manifest itself there in Seattle, and then worked its way across the country into more urban centers. Talk a little bit about how the airport reacted, when you reacted, and what changes you made as this pandemic began to look like it's going to take root.
So unfortunately, infectious diseases, as I mentioned with the 2003 SARS outbreak, are not a new thing for airports to deal with. With the history of things like SARS and H1N1, airports probably over 10 years ago developed and were required to develop an infectious disease response plan. So it's something we review on an annual basis. And so once we started to see the coronavirus issues being talked about in December, coming out of China, and through January and into February, we start reviewing those plans, gaining what intelligence we can from the CDC and from the FAA as to what it may be looking like as it either is in our country or is approaching our country, and start to put in place some planning for that. Unfortunately, the extent of COVID is like we've never seen. So it certainly stretched us and drove our planning and operations in new directions. Really, where we saw that this was going to be a history-making event was the second week of March, when the president declared a ban on travel to the United States, even from Europe. So that's a pretty significant step. So at that point, we as the aviation industry knew that this event was going to be different and more in-depth and of longer duration. So we continue to refine that standard plan we have for the more specific information that was being put out by the CDC, and really began preparing our employees, preparing our responses, make sure we had the protective equipment in place to protect our employees as they take care of the facilities, and also give them the ability to respond to any medical, police, or fire emergency that may be here.
So what kind of changes, physical and programmatic, did the Airport Authority institute?
The number one thing, and we actually have done this for a number of years seasonally, is to increase our cleaning efforts during cold and flu seasons. So we typically increase that at that time of year, but this drove us to take that to an entirely new level. Really did a very frequent cleaning of all public spaces and all surfaces, and prepared our employees, really reviewed their training so that they continued to do their job safely. And then as some of the quarantine recommendations came out, we began changing our staffing plans. We wanted to make sure, particularly for a department like our public safety department that is required to be here 24 hours a day, we're required as a certified air carrier airport by the FAA to meet certain standards, to have certain staff here for operation of the airport, of the airfield, for aircraft rescue and firefighting response, for security response. So we began to spread those shifts out, really separate those shifts to keep them from crossing over, so that we reduced any chance of a mass infection through our staff that would prevent us from being able to provide the essential service that we offer by having an airfield and all the things that aviation brings in and out of our community.
So as someone who flies, I fly so regularly, and I know many of our citizens and stakeholders do, and you all have done a great job of making and keeping this airport very accessible and very user-friendly. It's probably one of the most user-friendly airports that I've had the opportunity to fly in and out of. But we all wait in lines as we go through TSA, or even the frequent traveler. Is there any changes, protocols, or anything that has changed with as people wait in the queue to go through security? Is there anything that changed?
We've continued to monitor all the information coming out from federal, state, and local health professionals and agencies, and have incorporated that into our facility plan here at the airport. We've put together a committee of our airport authority employees from our engineering department, our operations department, our public safety department, our public relations department, and then also our tenants, our airlines and our rental car companies and our restaurant and gift shop concessionaires, and began very early on identifying what we could put in place to help support the social distancing and to keep that separation. Have began a process to put plexiglass screens at the areas at ticket counters where there's going to be a lot of interaction between the various tenant staff and the public. We're beginning a process to increase our signage to encourage the social distancing. So really, when we look at the month of April, we were down passenger traffic wise by 95%. So we only had 5% of the public in the building that we did the previous year.
So if you could put that into context for us for how many passengers travel in a year, and then how many passengers traveled April of last year, and then how many was that number this year?
If I can, I'll break it down to just a kind of an average day.
Sure.
Probably an average day in April of 2019, we would have had around 3,000 to 3,500 passengers departing a day. So those are just departing passengers. And we would, in April of this year, after COVID, we would be somewhere around 200 passengers a day. So from 3,500 down to 200 a day.
Wow, from 3,500 to 200 per day. That is unsustainable.
Well, thankfully, we've seen that start to come around. And so in April, we began putting our public space committee together and working with the tenants so that when we started a return, an increase of passengers, that the facilities were ready for that. And thankfully, we did see that return start to come back in about the second or third week of May. We've seen it go from about 5% of what we had the prior year for that same week. In May, we saw it to go to 15 to 20%. And then so far in the first week of June, we've seen that number go up to about 25 to 30%. So we are seeing a return of passengers, and we continue to implement all we can to, number one, keep the facility clean and sanitary, and then to continue to promote social distancing within our facilities. And then the airlines themselves, all of our airlines have put into place measures for having passengers wear masks on the aircraft and increase the cleaning of their aircraft. So a lot has gone into place during this slow period to be ready for the return of passengers and to make sure that that return still provided a safe environment.
So as related to those passengers that are flying, do you see commercial air travel coming back to good levels or moderate levels? Or do you think it'll be led, or let me say this, this is a question that's come in, or do you think it's going to be led by a business traveler or leisure traveler? Which do you think comes back first, and from there?
A lot of that travel is seasonal. So what we are seeing in this immediate return is a little more leisure travel. So we're in the summer months. Sometimes it's easy to lose track in this strange environment of kind of what season we're in. But we are in summer months, and we have seen that over the last few months, when people have been in self-isolation, in quarantine, that they're very anxious to get out and travel and try to put some level of that normal summer experience back into play. So far for June, we think we're seeing the majority of the rebound in travel to be leisure travel. We think that as we move into the fall, we'll see a pickup on business travel. I think a lot of companies are still, evaluating and setting their protocols for travel of their employees, and hopefully they'll continue to gain that confidence that we are in a good, safe spot to start traveling again in the fall, and that we expect the business travel to begin its rebound in the fall. We do know and expect that over the next year that it's going to be kind of a slow return. We would expect that probably by about this time next year, we may be back to 70 or 80% of the travel we had a year ago. Part of that is just the airlines have done a lot to reduce their system, park their aircraft, and they will be a little slow to bring that capacity back up to the same level it was. So it could take actually a couple of years before we're back close to the level of passenger activity we were in 2019. And that's really a direct reflection of the airlines being slow to return to that level as they see that demand is really there for passengers.
That really coincides with what we see being the tourism entity for this community. Blount County is very unique in that it has three different tourism markets, if you will: a leisure travel, a resort travel, and then a corporate company travel. And what we've seen is the leisure and the resort travel have returned back to right at 100%, but the corporate travelers, it's very, very slow right now. So what you're seeing kind of coincides with what our economy is seeing. You had mentioned parking aircraft. I can't help but drive down Alcoa Highway, and I swear you've opened up a dealership for commercial aviation. Talk to us a little bit about that. You're not disposing of aircraft out there. That's not a car lot or a plane lot. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, when you drive by and you see the number of aircraft out there, it begins to give you a little bit of feel for what the airline industry is having to do. I think at peak, we had 55 commercial jets parked here at various places on our airfield.
Wow.
And overall, if you look across the airline industry, they have reduced the number of flights moving across the country in April and part of May. They probably reduced that by 50 or 60%. So those are a lot of aircraft that have been parked at various airports around the country. We are beneficial in that we have two heavy maintenance facilities here on the airport, one for Delta and one for United Airlines. So typically when an aircraft is going to be parked for an extended period of time, say a couple of weeks or a month, it needs some certain maintenance procedures done to it to prepare it for that type of storage. And then when it goes back into service, it needs certain things done to it to prepare it to go back into a flight mode. And that's the benefit of bringing those aircraft here for those two airlines, is that they had the technicians and the mechanics here with their heavy maintenance facilities. So as we started getting those requests in from our airlines, we looked for every opportunity to assist them in such a unique environment and be able to park a large number of aircraft very quickly. And we've started to see a good thing that some of those aircraft are being put back into service. So hopefully that trend will continue.
So I'm going to mention to our viewers, if anyone has a question anytime during our conversation, feel free to write it in the chat box and we'll try to make sure it's asked. So with the aircraft we're talking about has been parked and that number is dwindling down a little bit, but predominantly still several aircraft out there. Do you expect any major changes to the airlines? That's a lot of capital to be having. I'm sure they're financed at some level. It's a lot of capital to be underutilized sitting on a tarmac somewhere. Do you see any maybe routes change or maybe even aircraft being phased out of utilization? Certain airframes aren't flown by the airlines to just try to survive. We welcome your input.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with what we're seeing here at McGee-Tyson and then just kind of give a bigger view of what we will probably see in the airline industry. The good news is at this point, all of the routes that we had prior to COVID are expected to come back. So during April and May, we did see about 4 or 5 routes that were taken out of the system from the airlines, but we expect that in July and August, all of those will return. Even the addition of routes that Allegiant Airlines had announced back in January and February, 5 new routes, that all of those are expected to return. Some of them actually have started the last 2 weeks, and then a couple of more will start later summer and early fall. So the good news is we're going to come out of that based on current schedules with all the same destinations that we expected to have. We are seeing a difference in the size of aircraft during this downturn. Some of the larger jets that we had on the schedule at McGee-Tyson that may have been 100 to 130 seats, during April and May, they were reduced to 50 and 70 seat aircraft, but we expect those to start coming back to the larger aircraft as well. So we think we're going to continue as passengers return to still provide all the same beneficial destinations and really great size aircraft for this market. When you look more at a nationwide basis, we certainly expect airlines to be smaller. Some of the industry information's indicating that we could see an airline industry that's about 80% of what it was. So about a 20% reduction, 15 to 20% in capacity. And what that means is airlines gauge capacity based on the number of seats they're flying around. And so with that being smaller, some of those are going to be very large jets that may come out of the system. Some of those may be smaller jets. And so what it could mean is for some markets, fewer destinations or less frequency or smaller aircraft. So that is really still in the development by the airlines. Their ability to show their schedule ahead right now is limited to about 1 month. So we can look ahead by 1 month and see what's going to be in the market. But the airlines themselves are having to play this on a very short-term basis because they're trying to gauge really 2 things: what the return of passengers are related to the impact of the virus, and then what the economy is going to do related to the impact of the shutdown. And they're having a very difficult time to project that out very far at this point.
So do you think there will be any lasting effects for fare? I know fares right now are extremely inexpensive. We've actually seen, this has been 3 weeks ago, but for the fall, there was a round trip ticket we came across for a little over $400 to Hawaii and back, which was just had trouble wrapping my head around that. But, and I know that our market sometimes has suffered from some higher fees, but do you think any insight into what fee structure may look like post this?
It's really hard to gauge anything based on what we've seen over the last 3 months. When you look at an aircraft that may have 100 seats on it, but that flight only had 5 people, then the airlines were doing what they could to increase the utilization. So there were some good fares out there. So as the two things happen, that they've reduced the number of flights available, gone to some smaller aircraft, and the number of people flying are starting to return, probably going to be a little less likely to see those ultra cheap deals like you referenced to Hawaii. But it's really hard to tell what the longer term impact is going to be. And we really may not know that for another year until we see what the airlines finally settle into as far as how much capacity they're going to put back in long term. When you look back at 10 and 20 years, airline fares have always fluctuated for a number of reasons. So that's going to continue. But overall, we would expect that about a year from now, that fares are going to start settling into some level that's more of a standard trend. Between now and then, it's really going to be unpredictable to know when the fares may be high or low.
So if you had to give any advice to folks out there traveling, it would still be, I would assume, be a good practice to try to buy your fares as early as you can, because there may simply just not be capacity there from not as many airline planes flying right now.
Typically, the best fares are found about 30 days ahead of time. So we recommend people book anywhere from 21 to at least 30 days ahead of time. If you know you're going to have travel even beyond that, the earlier you book, typically the better your fares are. Now, that's not to say you can't find cheaper fares on shorter notice, but those are a little more rare. And if you, particularly for leisure travel, if you know you have some travel coming up in the months ahead, just continue to price those fares, see what the options are, stay attuned to the market, and you'll pick up, if there's a good fare out there, you'll be educated on what a normal fare looks like and be able to take advantage of it.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the programming and airline changes, but there's even changes outside of COVID that are occurring at the airport, and specifically with the new Alcoa bypass that's being built out near the airport. That whole area of how you engage with the airport itself physically is going to be changing over the next several years. I think the Hunt Road interchange is underway. And so comment to us a little bit about what we could be seeing at the airport.
Well, probably number one, we're excited to see that work happening. I know there's a long history and need for improvements to the Alcoa Highway corridor. So to actually see it in progress is going to be a great thing, I think, both for Knox County and Blount County and the interchange of people we have between there, and certainly for both of those groups as they come to the airport. With that being said, we certainly expect to have some growing pains and headaches over the next 5 years or so as that occurs. I think just next week, we expect the Hunt Road interchange and the Hunt Road Bridge to be closed. And we know that's going to cause some rerouting of traffic in every direction, including the airport. So we're trying to do our best to stay connected with TDOT and to try to spread the message of what impact that may be for travelers coming to the airport. But ultimately, pushing through the difficult period, we're excited to see safer travel throughout that corridor. And then ultimately, it will help contribute to somewhat of a new front door entrance to the airport. As those roads have finally been planned out where we know approximately where they're going to be, we've been able to incorporate that into our airport master planning efforts. And it really gives us some space to have maybe a better entrance and a better front door to the campus of the airport when the project's finished. So probably a lot of headaches ahead, but ultimately a lot of benefit, and we're just glad to see that work finally started.
So is there any capital projects outside of COVID related to access to the airport that I would think, since the airport is fairly underutilized right now, are there any projects that you all are taking this opportunity to maybe look upon or address at all?
We are, our number one project priority is our runway reconstruction project. That project's been in the works for 5 years. It's been under construction and been closed for 5 years. And thankfully, we have worked very closely with the FAA over the last few months. And about 2 weeks ago, we received a $15 million grant that's going to provide the funding for the last phase of that runway reconstruction project. Totally rebuilding that runway from below the ground up and putting another 10,000 foot of length on that runway to take it, 1,000 foot of length to take it out to 10,000. So it's going to be a very long, capable runway. Should be a great benefit to our Air National Guard operations. And that's really been probably the most important project we've been working on. And it's great to see a piece of the funding that's going to bring us to the end of that. That project should be completed by December of 2021. As we move away from the airfield and start to look more at the terminal area and all those support facilities, leading up to March of this year, we were really under some capacity constraints for automobile parking, even airline parking around our terminal building. And really prior to last fall, we'd been in some constraints at our TSA checkpoint. Last November, just in time for Thanksgiving travel, we were able to open up a 4th lane at the checkpoint. So we gained a lot of capacity there. And now with the downturn in passengers, it gives us an opportunity to kind of catch up to some of the growth we've been seeing. So we have a lot of planning efforts underway to help us with future automobile parking, future aircraft parking. And then it gives us a chance to do some work on our parking garage and some of our parking lots that when they are full, it is very difficult to have spaces in there to do the maintenance and some of the repair work. So we've accelerated a project to try to take advantage of this lower period and get some of that facilities work done while we have the extra capacity in those facilities. But we're also very much keeping our eye in the fact that we know after every significant event over the last 20 years in aviation, passengers have always returned to new record levels after that. So we're keeping our eye on that ball and doing our planning and preparing for, again, a strong return and future record numbers, in 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road.
You had mentioned just then about how passengers rebound after those events have occurred. Is there anything from SARS or in 2003 or the recession in 2008 that kind of sticks in your mind as kind of a lesson learned that can be utilized today for airports?
Really, the most significant lesson is that passengers will return, and the long-term trend for aviation is significant growth. So there was a little bit of time after the 2008, 2009 recession where I think the airport industry really got very conservative and maybe didn't move some projects forward as quickly as, again, on a nationwide basis, as we'd like to when we hit the record times of 2016, 17, and 18. So we're trying to learn from that to make sure that we are continuing to plan for the future of travel in and out of McGee-Tyson and Downtown Island Airport for our region, and not taking our foot off the gas for looking to the future and making sure we have all the facilities we need to meet the demand of the region.
Well, we really appreciate the the purposeful engagement of trying to get new airline routes opened up here. It has meant a lot to those of us that practice in economic development. It always comes up. Do you have direct routes to certain cities? I know the West Coast has been one of the hotbed that we get push on. Of you have any direct flights to the West Coast, but every stride you make in those areas of opening up another direct route just helps the whole region. And so we're very grateful for your all's push to continue to do that. And who knows, hopefully that, as you say, passengers really come back in a strong way after these events. Maybe you can open up 10 more for us.
Well, it will be a rebuilding for air service across the country for many airports. But as the airlines look at it, they don't create economic activity, they follow it. So the fact that McGee Tyson has done really well with attracting new routes and new air service over the last 4 years is really a direct reflection on our region and the economic activity there from both tourism and industry. That is the real key and responsible for our growth. That's what attracts the airlines. We try to always be on the airline's front door and reminding them of what we have in the region. That's our job, but it's truly the demand the region has and the economic activity that ultimately wins the day for that service. So that's a direct reflection on what you do, what the partnership does, and really a lot of great work throughout the region.
Oh, thank you. Is there anything that you would like or any wisdom you can impart to our citizens or stakeholders in our area and region of how they should interact with the airport, or any takeaways as they approach utilizing McGee Tyson?
Yeah, we would recommend they continue to actively seek out information. We have very purposely put information on our website. We connect through our website to each airline. Each airline of our 5 has a little different information they're putting out on their requirements. So we would encourage passengers just to be aware that the standards for travel have changed, but travel's still safe. Our terminal building is well prepared to accommodate that travel. The airline industry is working extremely hard to make sure aircraft are clean and safe, and that travel experience is very safe. So we would ask passengers do their part, and before they come to the airport or take a flight, that they make themselves aware what each airline is recommending, and then stay updated on Alcoa Highway, because some of that work may make you need another 5 or 10 minutes to get to the airport. But we look forward to seeing you when you get here.
That's great. I know we're getting close on time. You did say something that kind of spawned a question that I have heard kind of in the background, is that when airframes fly in, that if they don't have time to clean the aircraft, they're utilizing another aircraft to ensure that proper cleanliness is occurring. Are you seeing that or hearing that?
What we see mostly is just the intense level of cleaning that the airlines are conducting on aircraft. They've always done that to some level, but they have certainly doubled their efforts over the last few months. So in between flights, and then what passengers really don't see is as that aircraft is on the ground overnight for an extended period of time, there's a very intensive level of cleaning that occurs for those aircraft that remain overnight. So the airlines are doing a lot to ensure that aircraft is clean and safe, and things that the passenger really doesn't have an opportunity to see between flights or late at night after that aircraft's on the ground.
Well, that's great. Well, we have come to the end of our time. I want to thank Patrick for joining us today and giving us some great information about the state of the airport and the airlines and what it could look like moving forward. I appreciate those of you that were able to send questions in. Patrick, really thank you again for your leadership. It's hard to believe you've been there a year and a half. It just feels like it's just been a few months.
Well, thanks, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity to be here on this program with you and join those who have tuned in, and appreciate the opportunity to partner with you in the region.
That'd be great. Well, without further ado, we appreciate everyone for your time, and we'll see you next time on our Community Conversation series. Have a great day.